Coronavirus, college football. Coronavirus, college football. Let's see. Trump, Rogers. Well, I think college football wins for sure. I got to go with Trump being a little bit more amusing and entertaining than me. But once you add Nathan Urbach and Mason Plummer on my side with the three of us, hey, you got the entertainment and the knowledge and the college football on our side. We talk Notre Dame football every Monday night at 6 o'clock Eastern time right here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. And at times we've got to slide the day and time. That makes it important that you subscribe right here. Get me to 20,000 here real soon. And then, of course, you turn on the bell, get the notifications. All right, let's talk Notre Dame. And, of course, college football fans, you can talk it up in the live chat concerning whatever you'd like. Bring your comments, your questions, and your debate topics. Nathan, Mason, how you guys doing?
Doing good, Mark. Thanks for having us on again after the NFL draft. So it looks like we got a lot to talk about today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Doing well. Nice something to talk about for once, other than just speculation.
Absolutely. So we'll dive into Notre Dame's draft. I will be monitoring Twitter because we posted a few poll questions involving Notre Dame football in recent weeks. And we will get to those and display the results. All right, Cole Kmet. I think a lot of people found out about Cole Kmet the night that Notre Dame played Georgia on national TV, and that by far was the most important and compelling game of the day, or at least in prime time. And Cole Kmet maybe made some money in that game. He looked really good. He looked like he overmatched a very talented defense. The coverage guys for Georgia didn't know what to do with him. The defensive coordinator for Georgia didn't know what to do with him. He had a big night. So Chicago, the Bears, obviously, they took notice. Second round, number 43 overall. Nathan, we'll get started with you in regards to your thoughts about Cole Kmet and his projection to the NFL.
Right. It's funny. Going into the draft process, when he declared, it seemed like he was the consensus top tight end. And then they get into the draft, and he goes to the Bears at 43, and Bears fans would not stop complaining about it. I thought that was really funny. And the main reason I know that is I'm a Bears fan myself, so I really like the fit. They have a need at tight end, and they had a need at the more traditional tight end role. They signed Jimmy Graham in the offseason, and he's sort of that why, he's not going to really block. He's going to be more, stretched out wide and so on and so forth. And Kmet can play more of that inline role. He'd be the traditional Y, while I think it's the X or something like that, whatever they call it in the NFL these days. But Kmet would be more the inline guy. He's still a little raw as a blocker, but he definitely has like the 6'6", 260 frame in order to do it. And the Bears, even though they have the joke came out about the 10 tight ends on the roster or whatever, they have 9.5 crappy tight ends on the roster. So it was a big need, and it was a cool story being the hometown kid from Lake Barrington, Arlington Heights area. Funny story, he actually went to my dad's high school, and my dad coached at St. Viator High School for a while as well. So my dad was pretty happy about that, being a Notre Dame fan and a Chicago area guy.
Yeah, something I found funny was all the jokes about the 10 tight ends on the Bears roster. And I think people don't really know what they have in Kmet necessarily, unless you're a Notre Dame fan or you study the tight end position, I guess, or really know everybody that's coming out. Unless you're a Notre Dame fan, you didn't get to watch a ton of Kmet. And I don't think a lot of Bears fans know necessarily what they're getting, making jokes about, we got 10 tight ends or whatever. And I like what you said, Nathan, about 9.5. You have half of a Jimmy Graham at this point, with how old he is. And then you have what I think could be a generational talent in Cole Kmet. Like you said, he's a raw blocker, but receiving down the field, he's going to be great. And the Bears like to use their tight end, so I think he could be Greg Olsen 2.0.
So a little fun fact here in regards to Brian Kelly and Notre Dame, much like Stanford in recent years, has really built a reputation on developing tight ends for the next level. For the third time under Brian Kelly, Notre Dame has posted the first tight end selection in the NFL draft. The first two were Kyle Rudolph, 2011, second round, number 43 overall. Sound familiar? Just like Kmet. Tyler Eifert in 2013, a first rounder, number 21. So that's the rundown on Cole Kmet, of course, going to the Chicago Bears.
Right, and the other thing is, Notre Dame traditionally, and especially under Brian Kelly, every single starting tight end that they've had has been drafted. So I think when Notre Dame has a tight end in the draft, the NFL takes notice. They don't always go, first or second round like the guys you mentioned, but they also had Troy Nicholas, who went second round, Durham Smythe, fourth round, Alize Mack and Ben Koyak both went in the seventh round. And a lot of those guys are still playing today, even though they were, lower round picks. And then even going back further than that, I think they've had every starting tight end drafted to the NFL since like the late 1990s. So like I said, when Notre Dame gets a tight end in the draft, the NFL definitely takes notice for sure.
And that's not something that's stopping anytime soon, considering the tight end commits that have come in recently. You have Michael Mayer, Kevin Bauman, just guys coming through the ranks. I think Tommy Tremble has a future in the NFL. As you continue, I just did an interview with Kane Barong, the 2021 tight end. So Notre Dame tight end position is stronger than ever, and I think it continues as it translates into the NFL.
This to put a capper on Cole Kmet's career at Notre Dame. Really, this was his big breakout season after getting into 4 games as a freshman, catching a couple passes for 14 yards. More of a factor with 15 catches for $162 in 9 games as a sophomore in 2018. And then a decent year in 43 catches, 6 touchdowns, and 12 yards per reception for 60 catches for his career. Talking Notre Dame football every Monday night at 6 o'clock Eastern time right here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Regardless of who you root for, you jump in the live chat, kick it around with college football fans from all over the nation, all over various fan bases, but we talk nothing but Notre Dame football right here. So, our next selection, of course, let's see, we get to Chase Claypool, the wide receiver, second round, only 6 picks later, going to the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, I know Mason's obviously pretty pumped about that. He's a Steelers fan, so 2 Notre Dame guys went back-to-back, and me and Mason are pretty happy. It couldn't be a better fit, in my opinion, for Claypool. It wasn't necessarily a team I was on the lookout for. I didn't really know if they were involved with wide receivers early in the draft. But they develop wide receivers, I think, better than anyone. I think there was a statistic actually that showed that after the draft was over. And you just look at the guys they've had. Juju Smith-Schuster is a great wide receiver in the NFL. They had Antonio Brown before he kind of went cuckoo. And then they've just had a bunch of, a plethora of guys throughout, the last, 10 to 15 years. So I think it's a perfect spot for a guy like Claypool. He's going to have a successful career, and in a deep wide receiver draft, maybe one of the deepest of all time. I think it's really a testament that he was able to go in the top 50 picks.
Yeah, being a Steelers fan, I wasn't necessarily expecting Claypool to go. I knew it was about his time to go, with both him and Kmet going relatively quickly in the second round. Nathan, we discussed that on draft day. We figured that if not in the first round, they're going to go very quickly in the second. I actually thought my Steelers were going to take J.K. Dobbins, and I would have been very excited about that, but I was even way more excited about Claypool going to the Steelers. The Steelers have a great history of not only drafting good wide receivers, but developing them as well. Like Antonio Brown was kind of a nobody before he went to the Steelers, Emmanuel Sanders, guys like that. So I think Claypool could be the next great wide receiver. You mentioned Juju Smith-Schuster, and he's going to get a lot of single coverage, as I highlighted in my article on Slap the Sign just a few days ago. So I think that him and Smith-Schuster could be the next really lethal 1-2 punch in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I think it's important to note what you said there. Like, none of those guys you mentioned were first-round picks. So the Steelers really know. They're like the Ravens with, drafting defensive linemen. A wide receiver goes there, and you can expect them to have a pretty productive career, whether or not they're a number 1 or whatever.
So that was only 6 selections after Kmet. Claypool comes off the board in the top 50 selections of the NFL draft. Bit of a trivia question here. So there have only been since 1970. So that's generally when the common draft started. So there's a few different eras of draft selections. The NFL draft started in 1936. Of note was that the first Heisman Trophy winner, Jay Berwanger, actually opted to not play in the NFL. So it's a much different game, different pay scale at this point than it was then. He could go probably work in a factory for as much money as he could have made in the NFL. I don't know what his vocation was, but that's what he chose to do. And there were like a zillion rounds. Johnny Unitas was drafted like in the 18th round, and Bart Starr and a number of top-notch players. And obviously the scouting challenges were much more severe than what they can deal with right now. But right around 1967, when the NFL and the AFL merged, actually on the playing field in 1970, was at the point that this particular tidbit starts. So there have only been 3 Notre Dame wide receivers drafted earlier since 1970 in the last 50 drafts, earlier than Chase Claypool. Do you guys have a shot at this one? 3 wide receivers selected in the NFL draft higher than Chase Claypool.
Since when did you say?
1970.
I mean, the 3 that come to mind, at least in recent years, are Will Fuller was a first-round pick, Michael Floyd was a first-round pick, and then Golden Tate was obviously a second-round pick. But I'm going to go with Tim Brown because I know he was probably selected higher than.
Look at that.
That was my 3. Damn.
He picked him off. Well, Mason, we'll have to give you a tougher question and make you look bad. But Nathan nailed it. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, that was good.
Well done. Yeah, Tim Brown, of course, the Heisman Trophy winner of 1987 in the 88 draft, Floyd in 12, and Fuller in 16. All right, we're talking Notre Dame football here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We got Nathan Erbach up front and center right there in the middle from Slap the Sign, and also Mason Plummer from Slap the Sign. There you go. So we're all set here talking Notre Dame football each and every week. Third round, Notre Dame goes with Julian Okwara to the Detroit Lions. We know that they need some help winning some football games. So third round, number 67 overall, defensive end Julian Okwara.
Yeah, I was a little surprised he slipped. I mean, I actually, that's probably false. I wasn't necessarily surprised he slipped. I think going into the 2019 season, I would have been shocked that he was a third-round pick. He's an explosive defensive end, a speed guy off the edge, ran a 4.5. A lot of people think he can actually maybe run in the 4.4s. He's a 250-pound guy. I think if he were to leave after his junior year instead of coming back for his senior season, I think there was a good chance he would have been like an early second-round guy. But for his draft stock, I think it was actually a good decision until he got hurt. And maybe some of the questionable play he had early on as well. But the cool story about that is obviously he gets to play with his brother, Romeo Okwara, with the Lions. It'd be cool to see them both coming off the edge. From separate spots. So no, that was a really cool story.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the better stories of the draft was seeing their reaction. They had the camera set up in their house, which is really cool to see Romeo reacting to Julian being drafted to the Detroit Lions, getting them to play on the same team. That's something I also discussed in the article I was talking about in the last topic. I was discussing like the winners and losers of the draft, and unfortunately, I don't think it's the best spot for Okwara to go. Just in terms of him having a great career, other than him joining Romeo, that's a good story. It's all good and fine, but in terms of him having a good career, Detroit's not the best place for him to go. I'd much rather see him go to a better franchise, a team that's known for winning. Detroit's in a tough division, and I don't know. I just don't see that necessarily going well. I'd like to see him go somewhere else, but it is what it is at this point.
Okwara with his most productive season 2 years ago in 2018 as a junior, statistically at least, 12.5 tackles for loss and 8 sacks, 7 more tackles for loss this past season in 19, 5 sacks to raise his total to 15.5 for his career, with a couple picks as well in his career at Notre Dame. And
who we got some time this year as well.
He did miss 4 games. Yep, absolutely. So that's worth noting. Certainly, that has to be taken into consideration. Playing 9 games versus 13 the year before. Cornerback Troy Pride. I think this kid's a really interesting prospect in regards to what I saw, which was limited compared to YouTube. But at the same time, I certainly took in the analysis on the networks and what they had to say. People are intrigued to see if this kid's going to pan out based on his athleticism, but maybe some limitations there as well. Obviously, going 4th round to Carolina.
Yeah, it's an interesting spot for Pride to land. As everybody saw, they made a big deal that Carolina drafted entirely defense. I don't think he necessarily works himself into a spot starting and right away. Carolina has some solid corners, but Pride does have the track star speed going for him. That's what you're looking for in a corner. Wasn't necessarily one of the first corners drafted. It was a really, really good cornerback class, but speed's going to get you into the NFL. And his coverage skills, they improved. But in the Reese Senior Bowl is really where he shined against one of the top wide receivers in this class. Michael Pittman Jr. locked him down and really raised a lot of eyebrows at the Reese Senior Bowl. Pro Football Focus highlighted him a handful of times. They really liked what they saw in him. So his career will be interesting to watch if he gets on the field. Special teams could be key, but yeah, it should be interesting to watch.
Pride's one of those guys I was a lot higher on than most. I think if you look at his 2018 film, specifically the last 6 or so games, I think it's a first-round talent. He played out of position this year at Notre Dame. With Julian Love leaving, he had to switch over to the boundary corner because they didn't really have anybody else that could really fit that mold, and he did a pretty good job. But like I said, it's not really his best side of the field, and guarding some of those bigger receivers isn't really what he's best at. So if a team's able to get him back to the field side, where he can let his speed, just backpedal and go, maybe a slot role. I think he could do well in the slot as well. So I think the Carolina Panthers, who are known for being a good defensive team, Matt Rule obviously is back, is in the NFL now, and he's a good defensive coach coming from Temple and Baylor. So. No, I'm excited, and like Mason said, he's one of the fastest guys in the draft. Even though the 4.40 was a little slow, I think from what we were thinking. Matt Rule talked about him right after the draft, and he said that he thought he could run a 4.3 too. So I think the NFL knew that was a slow time for him, even though he's considered really fast. So no, it was a good spot for him, and I think he can play early on.
47 and 40 tackles the last 2 years for Troy Pride and 4 career picks. He again goes to Carolina. So we got defensive end Khalid Kareem, 5th rounder, number 147 overall, goes to Cincinnati. First Notre Dame player drafted by the Bengals since first rounder Tyler Eifert, who we mentioned back in 2013. So Kareem to the Bengals.
Yeah, no, Khalid Kareem, I think he was one of the more underrated pass rushers in the draft. He got hurt. He played through a shoulder injury during his senior year. It seemed like he was always on the ground, even from sophomore year on. But he was just a guy that, he was a team leader. He was a workhorse. He might not have the elite speed of a Julian Aquara coming off the edge, but he was just so technically sound. That I was a little surprised he fell to the 5th. I think that might have to do with a little bit with the injury and maybe defensive versatility of sorts. But I do think he can play in a 3-4 and a 4-3 if you put him in the right spot. And I think he's going to surprise some people in the NFL. He was just a productive guy. Doesn't have the highest ceiling necessarily, but I think his floor is that of at the very least, a really solid role player.
Yeah, I think Kareem actually hurt himself by playing through injuries this past season. He knew that Notre Dame needed help at the defensive end position, losing Dalen Hayes and Julian Aquara. He played through injuries and probably dropped his draft stock a little bit, but that just speaks to the kind of guy he is. I got to interview him a handful of times, and just a model guy, somebody you really want in your organization. As Nathan said, I can see him definitely playing early on. I think he's actually more ready to play than Julian Aquara is, if that makes sense. He's much less raw than Aquara is. He's much stronger, and as Nathan said, he can play in a 4-3 or a 3-4. The Bengals landing spot's okay. I don't know whether he'll start necessarily on the other side of Carlos Dunlap, but if he is right behind Dunlap, that's a good guy to learn from as the Bengals edge rusher. So Kareem is another guy I'm really interested to watch his career. It's an interesting spot for him to land.
Second on the team in tackles for loss, tied for the team lead in sacks with 5. Has double-digit tackles for loss the last 2 seasons, 13 sacks for his career, 3 seasons at Notre Dame as a sophomore, junior, and a senior. All right, next up, we've got safety. How do you pronounce his first name?
Alohi.
Gilman. 6th rounder, 186 to the Chargers. Do we expect him to make a roster, make any kind of impact? Obviously, at this point, special teams comes into play pretty heavily.
Yeah, I think absolutely he makes the roster, and the Chargers just really seem to love Notre Dame guys. They're up to 6 now with 2 undrafted free agent signings of Tony Jones Jr. and Dante Vaughn. So he joins a host of other Notre Dame guys, former Notre Dame guys. The Chargers have great guys at safety, including Derwin James. So I think it's a great guy for Gilman to learn from. And while he may not be the prototypical safety, he's just such a charismatic guy and really like a true leader in the locker room. He's going to be great on special teams. He's going to give you his all. He's a really hard hitter too. He's probably going to have a long NFL career, not necessarily just because of his skill, but because of the great guy he is and how much of a leader he can be in the locker room. So I think he could work himself into playing time, but most definitely is playing a lot on special teams this fall.
Yeah, I think a lot like Kareem, he's a higher floor, lower ceiling guy. I'd be surprised. I mean, I shouldn't say I'd be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a 10-year, NFL career as a special teams guy, backup safety. Maybe he finds a way to get to become a good starter. None of that would shock me just because of the way he's wired. He's a leader like a lot of these guys in this draft. I think Mason accidentally said Tony Jones Jr., but Asmar Bilal was the other guy that went to the Chargers. So no, I mean every year I'm expecting the Chargers to take someone, and then if they don't take anybody, they're gonna grab people as undrafted free agents. So yeah, no, I mean it was a good fit for him. I like the Hawaii to the California, kind of suits him as a personality as well. So. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was a really good fit. He gets to play with a lot of his, former teammates.
I said Jones, and I think it was too late to go back, so I just kept on going.
I had to correct you and be the smart one here.
We still need to set up the arm wrestling match between Nathan and Mason, MSU #1 fans. So while many may have forgotten that conversation from last week, MSU #1 fan is certainly not forgotten. He's kept that right here for a full week, and he's eagerly awaiting it.
I finally have my home gym set up, so I think I got the edge on Mason.
Right so you're trying to push this off of maybe a few weeks. Bulk up.
Right, yeah. He doesn't want to right now because I'm ready right now. He needs time.
I'm ready. I'm just saying, like when it finally happens, which will be 3 years from now or something like that. And I'm getting older, so you got to give me some time.
Right.
So somebody's also happy, Nathan, that you found your razor.
Yeah, that was actually an accident. I was trying to trim the beard. I've never really had a beard for the first time. I botched it, so I was like, you know what, I have to actually end up shaving. So it was more disappointment than anything.
Was it that, or you just didn't want to come on here and be humiliated by Mason's superior beard?
No comment.
Okay.
Mark, I feel like you could grow one pretty good. I see some stubble. You could get thick in there, huh?
What's that?
Could you grow a pretty thick beard if you wanted to? It looks like you got...
Actually, I had something going here, but I actually just trimmed like 20 minutes before we came on, right before I jumped in the shower. I gave it the clippers and trimmed it back down. If I could snap my fingers and have a clean shaven face, I would do that most of the time, or just have a little stubble. When it grows a little longer, that's just because I'm lazy. That's all that is. I just don't feel like with it, just like everybody else. But yeah, I don't think I look so great once it gets a little longer. I might have some issues right in this area right here, maybe, but I could do pretty well. My son, man, he's 23. He grows a beard like overnight.
I try to keep this. I struggle to connect it all in here, but if I get rid of everything, I look like I'm 12. And yeah, I don't really look that old to begin with. So
yeah, so hang on to that. Embrace that, because at some point, it's going to happen before you know it. You're going to want to look younger than you are. So that day's coming. It probably is not coming real soon, but it'll seem like it does. Right, folks, we talk Notre Dame football each and every week. We would like your comments, your questions, your debate topics to bring to us concerning college football around, as long as there's some connection to Notre Dame. And when it comes to the NFL draft, do you guys walk away from this thing thinking that there's any negative or positive light that shines on any particular program? And of course, we're talking about Notre Dame, but based on the the results, that it becomes kind of a TV show that says, oh, wow, Ohio State does this or Alabama does that or whatever?
They really like the SEC. I mean, how do you not? LSU had like 17 guys go in the first 3 rounds. So you can't blame them there. I mean, they constantly churn out NFL talent, whether it's Alabama, Georgia, LSU. But Notre Dame officially has the most players ever drafted into the NFL. So there's that with 5'11".
Yeah, I think obviously the best teams produce the most talent. And I mean, so you're going to have the Alabamas, the Clemsons, the Ohio States churn out NFL talent with, better than anyone because they have the best programs in college football. So it makes sense. One thing I really find interesting is it seems like when a team has been good for a few years, whether or not that means that they've won a national championship or, they kind of like Clemson recently and LSU this year. They had, when they've won the championship, they've had more guys come out than maybe people thought. So like a Patrick Queen this year, I think a lot of people thought he was going to return to school. And then he came out and all of a sudden he's a first-round pick. And that's not to say that they don't deserve to be first-round picks or drafted players. But I wonder how another program, so we're talking about Notre Dame, if Notre Dame were to win the national championship next year, would their draftees go from 5, 6, 7 guys to maybe 13? I'm curious about that. I'm not, like I said, it's not a shot at the NFL because obviously they want the best guys in their with their teams. And like I said, those teams obviously churn out the best talent because they're winning national championships and so on. But to me, that's interesting. I wonder if it's a winning atmosphere sort of thing, if it's just, obviously they win, so they have the best talent. Like, I'm interested in your guys' thoughts regarding that, because I've noticed that the last, 10 or so years.
I think not only would more Notre Dame guys potentially get drafted if they were to win the national championship, but also you would see guys go higher. Like there was a comment that a guy was surprised Claypool, Aquara, Komet weren't first-round picks, and I think they absolutely would be, probably all 3 of them, given they're all healthy, if Notre Dame were to win the national championship. You have more eyes on them, and for some reason, I think that recency bias, playing the last game of the season, let's say you go off in the last game of the season, more eyes on you that way. I think winning the national championship absolutely helps your draft stock, and not only would you have 10 or 13 guys go, but you'd have more guys go up higher. You'd have probably 6 or 7 guys go in the first 3 rounds rather than just 2 or 3.
I think it's maybe something that NFL teams might want to take a better look at, specifically regarding quarterbacks. And I'm thinking of the Chicago Bears maybe overanalyzing the selection of Mitch Trubisky when Deshaun Watson was on the board. And I'm screaming and yelling, thinking, and I've got no investment in the Chicago Bears, but thinking, I'm not a scout, I'm not a coach, I don't try to overhype my ability to evaluate players. I'm just a guy that's watched a lot of football and been around for a long time, but I'm no scout by any stretch of the imagination. So I just sit and watch and learn. But man, it's just got to tell me something when a guy steps on the field, gets thrown around like a rag doll for a quarter, is down by 14 points against an NFL defense in the national championship game, and leads 2 fourth-quarter touchdown drives, throwing pinpoint passes and just making plays against, again, 11 guys that will play in the NFL and play significant roles and be starters for the most part in the NFL. And just to be able to do that, I thought it was mighty impressive. And I got to think that those kind of, just in regards to the name LSU, Ohio State, whomever that has a reputation for producing NFL players and impact NFL players, that may break the tie. I think the guys are still we certainly see, and for people that just simply watch college football, then take a peek at the NFL draft, they're often stunned and scratching their head, shaking their head at, why would so-and-so be selected in front of so-and-so who was a wide receiver at Michigan or a defensive end at Notre Dame, or we know who they are. Who's this guy from Alabama State? So they still watch the tape and evaluate the players and go through the evaluations. But I think maybe it breaks a tie and they feel a little bit more comfortable drafting a guy that played week in, week out in the SEC or went to a Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, that type of situation.
Yeah, for sure. Nathan, are you still on your Mitch Trubisky hill, or how's that going for you?
So it's funny. I hated the pick when it happened. when they drafted in 2017, I actually didn't want them to take a quarterback. I wasn't the biggest Deshaun Watson guy coming out, and I didn't think that they would take Mahomes, and obviously he's turned out to be a really good player. So I didn't even really have like Mahomes on the radar as like the number 2 or 3 pick. So in that sense, it's sort of a moot point. I really wanted Jamal Adams, but his first year under John Fox, and then his second year when they hired Matt Nagy, I was impressed. Not necessarily that he was better than Watson, better than Mahomes, because those guys had already kind of proven themselves to a certain extent, or at least Watson, Mahomes, his first year as a starter. And then this year, I was expecting, big things. I thought he would take that next step and not necessarily be Mahomes, for example, but, just be a really quality NFL quarterback, and then, shit hit the fan. And so now, I'm off of it. I think he's talented, but I don't know if he's there, in terms of diagnosing defenses and different things like that and being the most accurate guy. And I think that's the biggest thing for him.
I think you got to get him some help too, other than Allen Robinson. Kevin White, if he would have worked out, that'd have been great. But I think the Bears need to bring in another wide receiver. It would have been cool if they got Claypool, but I think Kmet helps him out a ton too. Not having a Greg Olsen type of guy, that I think that kind of diminishes Trubisky's ability there.
Right. Obviously we don't want to turn this into a Bears podcast or whatever, but I don't think he's been given the most weapons, which is certainly a thing. I'm curious what would happen if roles were flipped and Mahomes was in Chicago and Trubisky was in Kansas City. He probably wouldn't be what Mahomes is, obviously. I'm not trying to say that, but I wonder if people would think of him a little bit differently. But now we have Nick Foles, so we can dream of another playoff run like Philly did.
Just to hit a few comments in the live chat here. Paul Gonzales is saying or asking, could the rankings in college polls be affecting draft picks? The answer would be no. The NFL personnel directors could care less who gets ranked where. UCF's 8th, they're 12th. They could care less about the AP poll or any college football polls. They're generally fairly accurate. I have no issue generally. Not that I don't think there's some teams at times that are ranked 11th that should be 8th, or they're 15th and they should be 20th. Of course, I have an opinion about individual rankings, but I don't think they're skewed or there's any kind of inaccuracy to them overall. But personnel directors in the NFL could care less about college polls, if that's what you're asking about, the college polls. I heard Bill Belichick, because the Patriots drafted 2 Michigan players, asked about the Michigan program in his post-draft news conference. And you could imagine what Bill Belichick had to say about the Michigan program. Basically, I don't care. We evaluate players. It's coincidence that we drafted 2 Michigan players. It has nothing to do with their program. We evaluate players. To extend on a comment that Mason made, I'm looking at the all-time selections for the NFL draft. Yes, Notre Dame and USC are tied at 511. Ohio State 463, Oklahoma 397, Michigan 379, Alabama 374, and Nebraska at 361. There's a top 7 for you. And in regards to first rounders, what I saw today was Ohio State at 84, USC 82, and Notre Dame at 69. That's the all-time count for first rounders. And LSU tied Ohio State's record of 2004 with 14 drafted players this year.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Clemson and LSU are right there here coming soon. It seems like every year they're getting 15 and Notre Dame's getting 4, and it's only a matter of time until they catch up somehow.
Yeah, Michigan certainly should be looking over their shoulders at Alabama. They're 5 behind, and they're coming fast.
I was actually a little surprised that USC. There were a lot of people that were saying that Notre Dame was going to catch USC this year, and just looking at the kind of the ratio and some of the guys that were involved, I was a little surprised that Notre Dame officially caught them. I thought USC had a few other guys that had a chance to get drafted. I think Tyler Vaughns comes to mind if he was in the draft. I believe he was. John Houston as a linebacker, and then Christian Rector was a defensive lineman. I thought all those guys had a decent chance of getting drafted, but apparently not.
Mike thinks Mitch Trubisky's overrated. I don't think at any point is anyone out there overrating Mitch Trubisky now. Maybe coming out of North Carolina, he was overrated, but I don't know anybody out there that's rating Mitch Trubisky that highly amongst NFL quarterbacks.
Yeah, certainly not anymore.
All right, a little bit earlier, we had a question concerning Will Shipley. So Dan is asking, what's the current rumors on Will Shipley signing? Notre Dame needs him badly! Exclamation mark.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true that Notre Dame needs Will Shipley, and it's for more reasons than one. It's not entirely that they need the player, Will Shipley, the 5-star #1 all-purpose running back. It's also just like a representation of that Notre Dame can recruit with the big boys. You know, Brian Kelly's come out multiple times and said, we want to have a top 5 class. Well, how are you going to do that if you can't win the recruiting battles, essentially one-on-one with Clemson now, right? So you're trying to get the kid away from the Carolinas and bring him to South Bend. He has the perfect mold when you're talking about somebody that is a Notre Dame guy, right? High academics, religious, he has great relationships with all the staff. And just everything that you can imagine as a Notre Dame guy is Will Shipley. So kind of stealing John's thunder here. He's not here today, but he highlighted this in his YouTube video, and always Irish on YouTube, was that, you know, if you can't win these battles, then you can't expect to win the war, like of Clemson coming to Notre Dame or Notre Dame going to Clemson and winning those games. If you can't win the individual little small recruiting battles here and there, you can't expect to not only recruit with them, but be able to beat them on the bigger stage. And also shout out to Dan E. That profile picture is awesome.
Yeah, no, I echo a lot of Mason's thoughts there. If you flip-flop the locations of Notre Dame and Clemson, I actually think you'd be committed to Notre Dame by now. But I do think, you know, in some recruitments, proximity to home is a big deal, and, you know, that can't be denied. So whether or not, you know, Shipley has the whole, you know, I have a better relationship with the Notre Dame staff. I have a better relationship with their recruits, the religious aspect, the small school aspect, the academics, of course. You know, that's all great. But, you know, if proximity to home is a big deal for a lot of players. They want their grandparents to come see them play. They want their parents to be able to see them play instead of hopping on a plane and flying for 3 hours. They just hop in the car and they go, you know, and they go 2-3 hours down the road, which is a little bit easier. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a lot of what, you know, Mason, and then like he said, John mentioned in his on his YouTube channel the other day. You know, you got to stop making excuses for not winning those battles, though. And you got to win them. So go out there and, you know, convince the kid that South Bend, Indiana, is the best place to be, and, you know, maybe you win maybe you win the recruitment, and then maybe you win, you know, the game in a few years as well. So.
And he was really saying too that you got to hit on the ones that all Notre Dame guys, right? You absolutely have to hit on a guy like Will Shipley. If you lose out on a guy that's maybe doesn't value academics that much or whatever, or he really just wants to play at a super high powered, you know, like an Alabama or a Clemson or an Ohio State, where he's solely focused on going to the NFL. That's different than a guy who's looking for the 4 for 40, where he wants his degree. He's focused on other things. Shipley's mentioned a ton of times that he's really interested in business, and where are you going to get a better business school than at Notre Dame, and then playing high quality football as well. So you really got to win these battles when it comes down to it, in the grand scheme of things, if you want to win the war.
And when we talk Will Shipley, we're talking about the #1 all-purpose back in America, according to just about every service, including the 247 Sports Composite. So that is every major service combined. And the #1 player in North Carolina, good recruiting state, good football state, top 20 player in the nation, regardless of position. This kid can obviously fly, and has other skills at 5'11", 188 to be ranked a top 20 player in the country out of Weddington, North Carolina. So that's big, big time.
And I think he's actually closer to 200 now. I think like you said, he was 188 right there, but he's a bigger back than people give him credit for. He has the the attributes to be an all-purpose back, but he could really, he's a 3-down back for sure.
And he brings something different than a Chris Tyree, the all-purpose back Notre Dame brought in last year, where he's not going to run over anybody like Shipley will, but Chris Tyree is going to catch more balls out of the backfield and make more people miss, where Shipley's your, like Nathan said, your 3-down back, very similar to Christian McCaffrey in that way, where he will run over people, but he'll make you miss too. So that explains why he's a top 20 player in the class and most definitely a 5-star player.
It's been one of the big narratives since we started this live stream to talk about Notre Dame's recruiting efforts and then compare it to the elite and basically say there's nothing broken with Notre Dame's recruiting efforts. They typically rank somewhere between 8 and 12 in the country. But if you want to win national championships, you typically need to be, as Mason has pointed out, more specifically in the top 5 year after year after year after year. Those are the teams that are competing for national championships, going to the college football playoff. We know the teams we're talking about. To put that in perspective and to hit it from another angle, Ohio State got a commit the other day, and this was their 14th commit from a top 100 player for the 2021 class. So consider, if you're into recruiting at all, which I don't consider myself a recruiting guy, but I've got to stay abreast of it. I read it, I look at it, but I'm not a recruiting guy. To consider that there are generally 20 to 25 players signed in the Power 5 each and every year, 75 schools. So you're talking 15 to 1,800 players. So, of course, there's a big deal made out of the top 300 players. And then you're talking about the top 100 players. You're talking what? You're talking like the top 5 to 6% of the players that are going to be signed. And if one school has 14 out of the top 100, meaning their 14th best player that they signed, theoretically, of course, they can all turn out to be better or worse than their ranking, but generally their 14th best player of the class is going to be better than like 90% of the FBS's best assigned player. Their 14th best player, that's a gap.
Right. Ohio State's doing something pretty historic this year. Clemson's been having some of those unbelievable classes as well. Georgia's been really good, even though they haven't been able to win the big game yet with them. But yeah, no, I mean, I envy those recruiting classes to a certain extent, but we go back all the time with this. It's going to be really difficult even if Notre Dame gets into the top 5, I don't see them having those type of classes. There's just too many kids that don't fit the profile, to be able to get into the university. And so it's going to be tough, and they kind of have to, work with what's available to them to a certain extent.
How's the dog going to respond to a Will Shipley commitment? Is the dog going to be whining if Will Shipley commits?
Yeah, no, I'm trying to get her to be quiet. I don't know what her deal is right now.
No, she's good. All right, talking Notre Dame football here each and every Monday night, 6 o'clock Eastern time. Invite all the college football fan bases that come into the live chat. Bring your comments, your questions, your debate topics. We got Mason Plummer on the line, of course, and also Nathan Erbach from Slap the Sign. So if we head on over to Slap the Sign right now, what are we going to find?
Bunch of draft coverage right now. I know I have a story up on commit to the Bears. Mason, I think, did you write something about Claypool yet?
I have Claypool in the works right now. I published 2 days ago, that'd be Saturday, winners and losers of the draft. Not necessarily where they were picked, but where they went, the organization they went to, how deep the position is that the given player is playing, and just overall their chances of succeeding with that place, I guess. So not necessarily whether the player is good or not. If you're getting drafted to the NFL, obviously you're a good player, you're a winner in that sense. But whether or not the organization's good, whether it's a good fit, whether you're a winner or a loser in that sense.
And I have something coming out probably tomorrow regarding some 2021 NFL prospects. Everybody always likes to, fast forward all right after the draft to look at mock drafts for 2021 and the draft ahead. So Notre Dame should have a very similar class next year with maybe six safe bets to get drafted, maybe a few more if some guys come out.
So I got a couple questions for you guys for next week or future weeks' shows. Question number one regarding recruiting would be, who's the guy that got away? And certainly, of course, you can expand upon that, but we'll start with one. Who is that one guy that not necessarily, hey, this was the best player in the country, we wanted Deshaun Watson, but a guy that was reasonably in the fold. You thought you had him. You thought he was going to sign with Notre Dame, and something went awry, or he just dropped off the other side of the fence and signed with blank. Other question would be, if you could award a national championship ring to a former player, who would you give it to? A former Notre Dame player who deserved a national championship for whatever reason, or maybe you just like the guy, and you would hoped that things would have worked out differently. And of course, along with him, another 100 dudes would have won a national championship ring, but you really wanted it for that guy. So think that one over, and we'll get to those questions here in future weeks. And of course, I got to think in the next 4 to 6 weeks, we're going to know a whole lot more about how this is going to go down for the 2020 season. And then we can get our sights set on evaluating players and schedules and get set, hopefully, for some type of 2020 college football season. All right, everyone. Appreciate you stopping by and joining in the live chat. Make it on back here next Monday night at 6 o'clock Eastern time for Notre Dame Live. We talk Florida State football tomorrow night at 5 o'clock Eastern time. Typically it's 7, but 5 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow night, Florida State Seminoles Live. Nathan, Mason, join those guys over on slapthesign.com. All right, guys. Appreciate you stopping by and making this thing possible.
Thanks for having us, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.